I think it's easy to say what they don't want. And right now, I think in Tehran, what they don't want is a strong American presence in Afghanistan. Or if you want to go down the list, an Afghanistan that's under the control of some of Iran's regional rivals, primarily Saudi Arabia and to some extent Pakistan. So it's easy to answer the question that way. When you ask the question, what do they actually want? I'm not sure if you're going to get a straight answer. It's easier to sort of speculate about that part and phrase it in such a way to say the Iranians have for a very long time looked at Afghanistan as basically a security question. And as long as they continue looking at the eastern neighbor Afghanistan as a security proposition, it's invariable that they're going to look at it in those sort of zero-sum game geopolitical terms. The fact that Afghanistan, since the early 70s, has gone through so much political instability, has always created opportunities for external players to become, if not kingmakers, certainly influential players in Afghan politics. And Iran's been top of that list. They've done it well. Many times they've done it excellent. And they are hoping they're going to go back. And once, and this is the Iranian perhaps wishful thinking, once those roughly 10,000 American troops leave Afghanistan, then who's going to be left for the Afghans to turn to for financial aid, for arms, for whatever? Iran has been asked in the past, and they provided certainly for one section of Afghan politics, and they're hoping they can go back in, the usual suspects, the 20% of Afghanistan's Shia minority. If sectarianism becomes more of a problem than it is today in Afghanistan, who will they turn to? Iran will be there to offer its services. I think it's not purely sectarian. I think they are, we all remember the stories of bags of cash being handed over to members of the Karzai government. So Iranian influence in Afghanistan will play itself out in different ways. One good way of looking at it is to look at what Iran is doing in Western Afghanistan. That's what Iran calls its buffer zone. I mean, Iran's city of Herat provinces of Farah and so forth. What they're doing is cultivating local Afghan leaders, saying to them, we will be here in the long term. You should align yourself, continue to align yourselves with Tehran for your own good. Weapons has certainly been one of the items that's been speculated to be flowing from Iran into Iran-aligned groups. I mean, some people will even suggest that Taliban has been receiving Iranian arms. The supplying of arms is something Iran does to proxies across the region. It doesn't just do it in Afghanistan, it's done it, as you know, in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and increasingly in the case of Yemen. So that wouldn't be a new thing. But I think it's much more of a multifaceted approach, and the Iranians have been at this for decades. I mean, if you take some leading members of Afghan political establishment, take someone like Ismail Khan. I mean, these are people who in the past have found sanctuary in Iran. The Iranians know them so well. Sometimes they fall out, but they have in the past been able to quickly rekindle, and I suspect the Iranians will try and do that. The basic proposition in Tehran is, if you're from the hardliner camp, you basically believe in this notion that you have to be on the offensive. That if you want to deal with the American challenge in Afghanistan, you better show the Americans that you have capacity to hurt them on the ground in Afghanistan. So tit for tat, very kind of narrow focused on how do you play a muscular game. On the other side, you have the sort of moderates in the presidential palace and in the foreign ministry who tend to take a more holistic approach. It isn't just about how do you hit the Americans on the ground, should they come after Iran and Iranian interests. It's about what about the long term. For instance, the basic question is, would it be helpful for Iran and the United States to somehow, in some sort of a context, cooperate about the future of the economic well-being of Afghanistan? It's a large country, requires a lot of aid in years to come. The Iranians know they can't do everything on their own. Would they be better off in some sort of a partnership? Those are the types of questions you will much more likely to hear from the moderate camp. Again, if you go back to history, And oftentimes the Iranians would justify what they did in Afghanistan in the 1990s, supporting the Northern Alliance, based on the argument that if we didn't support the Northern Alliance, the Pakistanis and Saudis would have kept Taliban in power. And that Taliban being what it is was seen as an existential threat to them. Now, look at the big picture in the region. What is the argument Iran has used today in Syria? That ISIS is an existential threat, that there is a sectarian war being waged, the Iranians would argue, by Saudi Arabia against not just Iran, but Shias across the region. Therefore, being involved in Afghanistan makes not only sense, but has to be done. The Iranians are keeping their options open. What we've seen in recent years, for instance, is overtures to the Taliban. In the past 5-10 years ago, they certainly would have considered the Taliban simply as a terrorist organization not to be dealt with. Today, clearly the evidence shows that they are working, sometimes aiding the Taliban. Moreover, they're looking for extra regional powers that can come on board, most prominently Russia. So again, the Russians are like the Iranians now looking to the Taliban as an organization, as a group that has staying power. It will stay in Afghanistan, so why not start working with them? That's all being done in the context of the assumption that the United States at some point is going to be fed up and leave the place. So how do you empower your hands in that Afghan political scene?